16,500 millionaires are fleeing Great Britain this year alone. Not from Russia, not from Venezuela, from the country that for decades was synonymous with stability and capital power. These people have access to information that isn't available to the general public. Why are they running? And what exactly do they see that most people miss? In the next few minutes, I'll show you exactly that picture, the one almost nobody is talking about. But I'll warn you, by the end of this video, you'll understand something that most analyses completely miss. One specific reason why smart investors are not crossing Britain off their list. And to understand that reason, you first need to see how deep the erosion actually goes. Because this isn't a story about one problem, it's about 6 of them stacking on top of each other. Let's start with crime, because it touches something much deeper than statistics. It's the feeling of whether a society is under control. On this chart, total recorded crimes in the UK were around 6 million in 2003 to 2004, then gradually declined to about 4 million by 2013 to 2014. That looks like progress, but then the direction reverses. Crimes start climbing again, and in recent years, they're back up to 6.5 to 6.7 million. When the people who have options, entrepreneurs, high earners, mobile professionals, start feeling that public order is weakening, they don't write letters to Parliament. They start looking at real estate listings in Dubai, Lisbon, and Singapore. And crime doesn't just push people out. It raises the cost of doing business, suppresses property values in affected areas, and quietly drains economic energy from the places that need it most. And right here is where the connection begins with something that will surprise you: taxes. Because when both insecurity and the tax burden are rising at the same time inside a country, people with money start asking themselves one question: is it worth it? This chart shows what share of the UK's adult population falls into higher marginal tax brackets over time. Marginal rate means the tax you pay on every next additional pound of income. The share of people in the 40% bracket has been growing steadily, and after 2021 to 2022, there's a visible increase in the 45% bracket too, with projections showing even a 60% effective zone for certain income ranges. The total share of adults exposed to higher marginal rates is climbing toward 12 to 14%. That's a critical signal, because once the tax burden starts being felt not just by the ultra-rich, but by a widening group of active, productive people, the incentives change fundamentally. Think about it this way: if you're a surgeon, a tech founder, or a senior consultant earning well into 6 figures, and you know that almost half of every additional pound you earn goes to the government, at what point do you stop pushing harder and start looking at jurisdictions where the math works better? And this brings us to one of the most revealing charts in this entire analysis, the one that shows what happens after people start asking that question. The 2025 millionaire migration chart is striking. The UK sits at number 1 for net outflow of millionaires, roughly 16,500 people. China is second with about 7,800, India at 3,500, South Korea at 2,400. Britain isn't just losing wealthy people, it leads this negative ranking by an enormous margin. And here's what most people don't understand about millionaire flight. This isn't just a PR problem. When these people leave, they take capital, investment capacity, high-end consumption, philanthropy, tax revenue, and entire entrepreneurial networks with them. These are often the exact people who fund new companies, take risks on early-stage ventures, build professional networks, hire talent, and move an entire layer of the economy. And once this process gains momentum, it becomes self-feeding. Less capital leads to fewer new ventures. Fewer ventures mean weaker growth. Weaker growth forces the government to find more revenue. More revenue demands usually mean more tax pressure, and the spiral becomes real. But this is only the beginning of the story. Because if you want to understand whether a country has long-term strength, you have to look at demographics. And demographics is the thing most people ignore until it's far too late. Stop for a moment and think about this. If you had a business, a high income, and the freedom to live anywhere in the world, would you stay in a country with rising crime, a 45% marginal rate, and everything you've seen so far? Think about your answer, because the next section explains why it might affect you personally, even if you don't live in Britain. Look at the shape of Britain's population pyramid. You want to see a wide base, lots of young people who will become workers, taxpayers, consumers, and parents. Instead, you see narrow younger age groups and a bulge in the 30 to 45 and 55 to 65 ranges. This is the shape of an aging society. An economy depends on working-age people to support everyone else: children, retirees, healthcare, social systems. When the population ages and there aren't enough young people entering the system, growth doesn't just slow down temporarily, it slows down structurally. Now compare that with India, a much healthier shape, wide base, massive young workforce, enormous future consumer market. India doesn't just have a huge population, it has a population that's younger and more dynamic. Britain has demographic fatigue. India has the wind at its back. And that creates a direct line to debt, because when a country has a weakening demographic foundation, but still wants to maintain its living standards, social spending, and growth, it usually reaches for one tool: borrowing. The 10-year chart for UK debt to GDP shows levels around 80 to 82% from 2014 to 2018, then a sharp jump after the pandemic to 94 to 95%, where it stays. Debt to GDP tells you how large the national debt is relative to the size of the economy. The Maastricht Treaty criterion, used by the EU, sets 60% as a reference point for a healthy fiscal position. Britain is far above that. This sounds alarming, and it should, because when debt is this high, the country becomes dependent on low interest rates, market confidence, and the ability to maintain stable revenues. If growth is weak, demographics are bad, and spending keeps rising, this model becomes harder and harder to sustain. But here's where you need to see the full picture, because the 125-year chart tells a very different story. Britain has carried far heavier debt loads before. After World War II, debt to GDP hit roughly 250%, more than 2.5 times what it is today. And over the following decades, they brought it all the way back down through a combination of growth, controlled inflation, fiscal discipline, and time. Today's situation is strained, but it is not unprecedented. And that distinction matters enormously for anyone trying to understand whether this is a country in terminal decline, or one going through a difficult cycle. If this kind of analysis is giving you value, hit subscribe and like the video. It costs you nothing, but it signals to the algorithm that this content should reach more people, and it motivates me and my team to keep producing these deep dives. So far, we've covered crime, taxes, millionaire flight, demographics, and debt. Each of these is a problem on its own, but when they stack together and you add inflation on top, the picture gets genuinely serious. From 2016 to 2021, UK inflation hovered in the 1 to 3% range. Then came the global shock. Inflation spiked to around 6 to 7% in 2022 to 2023, before gradually coming back down to about 3% by 2025 to 2026. The peak is behind them, but the old world of near-zero price pressure isn't coming back. And when you have high debt, an aging population, weakening growth, and inflation that stays sticky, every one of those problems amplifies the others. That is the real pressure. And yet, despite everything I've just told you, Britain is not an economic wasteland. In fact, it might be the opposite of what you're expecting right now. Look at the top 10 companies in the country: HSBC, AstraZeneca, Shell, Linde, Arm Holdings, Rio Tinto, Rolls-Royce, Unilever, British American Tobacco, and BP. These are serious businesses with global reach and global revenues. And this is exactly why you should never think in extremes. A country can have deep structural problems while still containing world-class businesses and real investment opportunities. Buffett has made this point repeatedly. Even in difficult economic environments, exceptional companies can thrive. The UK market's price-to-earnings ratio sits around 18 to 20, while the US S&P 500 is significantly higher at roughly 27 to 28. PE ratio shows how much investors are willing to pay for one unit of earnings. The higher it is, the more expensive the market. At first glance, the UK looks cheap and the US looks expensive. And that's largely true, but there's an important caveat. American companies on average grow faster, have more tech leaders, higher margins, and stronger access to global capital. So the higher US valuations partly reflect genuinely stronger growth, not just bubble psychology. That said, the UK does look cheaper at a market level. And for the selective investor willing to do the work, there are real opportunities hiding inside that discount. And here is the real payoff of everything you've watched. When we say the breakdown of Great Britain, we are not talking about a dramatic collapse of the state. We're talking about a slow erosion of its competitive advantages. More crime, heavier tax incentives, pushing productive people out, millionaire flight draining capital, a weaker demographic base, high debt, and persistent inflationary pressure. All of that is real, but equally real is that Britain still has institutional depth, global companies, deep capital markets, historical adaptability, and a proven track record of surviving cycles far worse than this one. Britain doesn't look like a country that will collapse tomorrow, but it looks like a country that is already paying the price for years of misaligned incentives, accumulated structural weaknesses, and an unclear long-term direction. And if these trends don't reverse, the erosion will continue. Not loudly, not spectacularly, but in exactly the way that great nations most often weaken, slowly, while most people keep telling themselves everything is fine. Because when you see these signals early, you don't just understand the world better, you start managing your own future better. And if you watched all the way through and you understand why this isn't about collapse, but about slow, quiet erosion, type erosion in the comments. I'll know you get it.